Okay.
Call the meeting to order at 6:36. First item on the agenda. Second item on the agenda, approval of minutes.
I move to approve the minutes of our last meeting.
11:16, I think it was.
A second. For discussion, Alex, I have a couple of corrections.
Okay.
On the first page, there was a comment. Hang on, I'm going to bring it up on my screen just to make sure I say the right thing. But there was a comment basically that I said we've seen demonstration from other vendors. It should be another vendor because I've seen the one other demonstration.
Yep.
And then I noticed that Rassicot is spelled with one S and one C instead of two C's throughout the minutes.
Yeah, it's supposed to be RACICOT.
Yeah, so that needs to get searched out and switched to throughout.
RAC
ICOT.
ICOT. Okay.
And then on page 2, paragraph 2, I believe what Doug was saying is that that there is a limit on voice messages of 1 minute of recording.
Correct. It's a one
on messages, and then it talks about text right after that. So I think it should be clear that it's voice messages.
voice messages.
And that's it.
Okay. Any other corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain? Okay. Second item on our agenda for the night. Sorry, I'm scrolling back and forth between the minutes and the agenda. Discussion on Everbridge and Code Red. I wanted to leave this on here to see if anybody had any further comments from the last meeting when we went over Everbridge, or from the meeting before we're discussing Code Red, or seeing the demonstration from Code Red. Was there any questions, concerns, comments anybody's thought of since the last meeting? Moving right along. Discussion and questions and info for residents. Mike, and you want to start this off as to where we are with that, or I'm trying to remember what.
So
and I'm sorry,
I think the way we left it was we felt that it made sense that the majority of the questions should have preset answers so that we don't spend a lot of time wading through commentary.
Right.
It also allow us to extrapolate data from those answers. But then we would leave a free form field at the end for comments. I think that's where we were. And the only thoughts I had since that time were that when I read the minutes, I noticed we had talked about Tolland using a system that values time of day. So we should consider either in our questions, or if we go forward with a design, we should consider time of day. And maybe we ask the question in the survey, do you have a different level of priority that you're willing to receive after hours? You know, so for example, they're talking about road closures and things like that. All that information would only be done before 9 p.m., I think it said in Tolland. So maybe it deserves a staggered system that administrative messages are at a certain time of day or are only in a certain time frame. And maybe we should try to capture that in the survey.
Okay.
So you're suggesting asking them if they'd want them after hours?
Well, I think more on the idea of buy-in. So we're asking, in one of the questions we suggested, we were going to ask level of information do you want to get from the town?
Right.
So the next question is, are you willing to receive, some people may say, I only want emergency notifications ever. But then if you say, if administrative messages were kept to a certain time of day, would you still be willing to receive them? Or something like that. Because if people know for sure they're not going to get a lot of activity after hours, they might be willing to get administrative messages during the day. I'm not sure. That was just a thought that I had of offering instead of just tiers of levels of messages, it's tiers of messages based on time of day.
I would just make sure that we word that question so it's very easy to understand, so that I think it's a good idea to not give messages that are emergencies after late hours, of course, but maybe you just want to say something. Maybe it's like a multiple choice or something. What time of day are you willing to hear emergency messages? What time of day are you willing to hear administrative messages, instead of something complex that might get misread or misunderstood?
What if the question were phrased such as giving our idea of time frame in the question, right? So administrative messages that would be broadcast no later than 8 p.m., right? So basic administrative, because that would be a policy we'd come up with. I think that would be pretty standard, and that's what we've heard from everyone is, there's really no need to send a basic message like the park's going to be closed for working, because I know about it at 10 o'clock at night doesn't mean we should send it out.
Right. So maybe those just become part of the available multiple choice answers for that original question that we already have. If we're asking people, do you want to get administrative messages or do you only want to get emergency? Those might be answers A and B. Answer C might be, I'm willing to receive administrative messages if they're only from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Right.
And emergency messages 24/7. So you could just try, you could have maybe 4 or 5 answers that are variations that we think might be the variations we would use.
I agree.
Any other questions that anybody's come up with or thought of that should go out?
No, but just along that same last line of conversation, it might be good, I don't know, somewhere in the opening of the survey or in the lead into the question to define or give examples of what would be an administrative message and what would be an emergency message. People don't make assumptions.
I think that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we're having this discussion, and for the most part, those of us sitting here at the table are familiar with what falls into what category, but we shouldn't assume everybody understands this.
Yeah, other people might not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we take for granted.
We can tie those to Lieutenant Palmer's pre-canned statements. And Mike, I think the other ones I'm looking at are your pre-canned statements, where it was the town and state. If we can tie it to those, so we're aligned, they know emergency weather, police notification, hazardous situation. If we can tie them to those, then it makes sense when they see the pre-canned.
Yeah, so the survey probably needs some sort of introduction or preamble or whatever you want to call it that lays out a few of the things that we may not be 100% committed to as facts, but at least we think are within the range of what we're planning.
Right.
So then people can look at that, this is what we think we would do, but to make sure we're meeting the public's desires, we have this survey. So you now answer these questions based on what we showed you in the introduction.
Right.
That sounds good.
Any other questions or thoughts to put on the survey? And I like the pre-questions that you had sent out, Mike. Is there anything else that we should put in there? What we just talked about?
Do we think that we'll be ready to go within the week?
I think it's just a matter of deciding who's actually going to build the survey in what platform and who's good at it, who can build it. As far as writing the questions and even writing the preamble, I think we all know the basic idea of what we're talking about. So I think we could easily put the preamble together, or introduction, whatever you want to call it. It's just a matter of who do we know in this group or who's available to us, who's good at making surveys. You know,
Right.
I don't know if it'll be SurveyMonkey or what other tools there are.
I think I've only built one of them and it didn't go well, so.
I can honestly say I don't think I've done one yet.
I did one literally like 10 years ago. It was a campus fire safety survey for parents of incoming students at UConn. And that's the last one. And I don't remember at all how I did it or how I got the data from it. It was so long ago.
I've done it, I've done it fairly recently for work, and I'm a procedure writer, so I wouldn't mind.
It's great.
You know, if you, my email has been very temperamental, so if you wouldn't mind resending me the questions that we discussed, I think that would be good. Fortunately, most of these notices have been going to junk mail, so I might give you a different email address, but I can probably help with that if you'd like.
Perfect.
Alex, once we get a solid email address for Sarah, would it be all right if I work directly with Sarah, get those questions inserted, and we can rough out a first draft of the preamble? Try to get the survey drafted and ready for this committee to review it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
All right, so
I mean, if you want to write it down, I can give you my email address right now that I think will work more
Go ahead.
reliably than my Hotmail.
As long as you don't mind it being public, Sarah, as we're
No,
recording.
I don't mind. You know, don't send me
ahead.
anything dirty. It's my work email. It's Sarah, SARAH dot WORTHEN at prattwhitney.com.
okay.
One word.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I think you spared Phil from being volunteer since we know he's so good at it.
You
For
see me
being our
looking the other way,
survey.
Sarah?
I did. I tried not to make eye contact with your square there, Phil.
You knew it was going to be a Google survey if I did it. Sarah, I just forwarded you. I take your emails. You did that. I
Okay.
forwarded the email from Mike, so you have the 5 A and B questions.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then we'll, so Sarah, just, you have my email on the, on this distribution list. If you
Yeah.
want to email me and tell me what a good timing is for you, my schedule's
Okay.
very flexible. You and I can maybe even start with a Zoom, just the two of us, to just make sure we're on the right track.
Sure.
Is that okay? All right.
Yep.
And when it's all ready, we'll put it on our social media, on our website. We'll push it out through an e-blast. Phil, can you send it to your parents? And then I'm sure there'll be someone that said they never heard of it, but we'll do our best. You know, that's part of the problem, is how do we capture everyone with a couple of methods we use.
So Alex, once we have a draft together, we'll contact you and let you know to figure out next steps if you want to get the group to approve it or whatever you want to do.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so once it's rough draft, we'll send it out to everybody. We'll do a quick meeting and then just go through it and get it published.
I have a question for Board of Finance or Selectmen. In terms of timeliness, if we're going to purchase a product, if we are, when do you need to know in terms of budget preparation?
Well, yesterday, but one of the charge of this committee was to make a recommendation to the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen, right? So it's, you know, we're beginning of January where we'll all start building our budgets. And then the Board of Finance, might correct you if I'm wrong, will start hearing budgets early February.
In February, yeah.
So if we can get this out before the end of the year and get it back early in January, if what the recommendation is going to be is one of these two products, and I think we should really talk about these two, if that's what we thought, we can certainly put I could put a placeholder in our budget for those dollars in anticipation of that, and then take it out if the recommendation from this group based on the survey is something different.
I think that's very reasonable for Board of Finance. We're not expecting to see numbers in front of us until February anyway.
Right. And I believe the Board of Selectmen don't come to you till the first week of March. So
Probably.
we certainly have some time.
All right. Moving right along, review of surrounding town notification protocols. Lieutenant Palmer, did you have any of the surrounding towns or what their notification procedures are, or were you able to get any of those?
I sitting here, I've don't have anything specifically. I mean, I know that we've discussed Holland's protocols, and then Ashford is in much the same boat as you all. I don't know what Union uses. I think they rely on the CT or the
CT alert.
CT alert system, but the balance of the towns that are contiguous to you, Mansfield is the only oddball out there with their code red system, but they still have the CT alert option for all their citizens as well. So I mean, you're in the wheelhouse of where everyone is relative to this, and
Okay.
without making specific recommendations, there's a lot of functionality in the CT alert system that's available to you at no cost, and then after that, it's what the town feels that they want to do administratively, or if they think they need a redundant system if the CT alert doesn't satisfy the needs.
And can I
Mr.
talk a
Chairman,
little?
I've got to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And I talk a little bit about, Stuart, thanks for sharing the email. I was looking too farther back. So with COVID, there's been a lot of use of the CT alert, a lot of promotion of it, but now an increased use of it. So one of the recommendations to towns, once they got to the red level, alert level with COVID cases here recently, the recommendation was to send out a message to your residents using that CT alert system. So towns did. Then there was a ramp up in testing in communities because of everyone getting to the red level, and there was an increased use of the CT alert to alert you in Vernon of your usage, or in Tolland of where they're happening, something in Willimantic. And I just used some examples. I don't know that they did. I don't receive their alerts. But because of that, there's actually been some guidance now asking you to step back from using
Step backwards.
simply because they've had now an overwhelming number of people opting out of the system. So for those sorts of things, where in Willington, we sent a message out that basically said to see our website, right? Because of the red level alert. And that's where all the detail was. And we're kind of past that now because everybody's in the red and sort of maintaining that status. So without that available for us for certain things, we're limited in how many folks we can reach. And they've gotten very specific about back to what the rules of using the reverse 911 system are, right? It's not any different now, but really emphasizing that if you have something other than in these very specific categories affecting life and safety, that you need to be using your own messaging or a third-party messaging system, which Willington does not have. So currently, we're a little bit hindered on the number of residents we could hit with some basic information. Let's say we were setting up a testing site in Willington because our numbers significantly increased. We'd be really hard pressed to make sure we could reach everyone with the limited amount of contact we could use. Those 4,300 numbers that we use through the CT alert would not be an option to us because it doesn't fit into the necessary messaging category.
So Erica, I'm looking at are we looking at the same email that came about the CT
December
alert system?
1st? Yes.
All right, so mine is highlighted in red. It says CT level 1 CT alert messages. It's an emergency communication. Therefore, COVID-related messages should be short. It provides specific emergency information such as an outbreak or notice of short-term pop-up testing sites with less than 2 days notice, or change in existing testing locations. So there might be enough room there to use the system for a town like Willington if you're at that red level and, hey, because of that, we're going to stand up a local testing site.
Right. So if within less than 2 days, right? If we follow
Right.
that, but if we plan something, a little bit shorter time frame. So they've just really kind of narrowed down the use of it so that they don't see people dialing back. It's one of the things that we're concerned about with if we purchase our own system and we start to push out too many messages, people will suddenly opt out. And that's what we're seeing with the state system. Everyone opted in, and then boy, as things ramped up, everybody started to use it, and now people are opting out of it again. So I think it was eye-opening to see how people, even still during this time, will opt out of that system because they found overuse of it. But just something for us to be conscious of.
Yeah, I mean, it's also such a media overload, right? If they're receiving phone calls on like COVID, for example, which surely is something that's important to pay attention to, but they're getting it on the phone and they're getting it on television and they're getting, maybe that sets people off.
Right.
I wonder under just regular circumstances if that would change the frequency of messaging to the point that there was less of an opt-out type of mentality.
I'd like to hope so, but I think we've heard, and certainly Doug spoke to it, about people opting out of it because I may have wanted to get information about road closures, but once it's starting to be used that way, it's really, I changed my mind. This isn't what I want to know about.
Right.
So, it certainly made it more conscious in my mind that a system has pluses and minuses, right? Having our own, we have something that's available, but we have something that's available with a very fine line of usage right now. And that is immediate life and safety.
Maybe, whichever system gets adopted, I would assume that it will be paired with writing some type of policy about how to use it. And maybe in that policy, the team can make decisions like a decision tree type of, setup where you decide whether something goes to the phone system or goes to the town website, or it's a sign in the intersection like it did during some of the power outages or something like that, and give some guidance to users with like recommended usage of the various means of communication that we have in town. Even the Facebook groups and things like that too,
Christina, can I ask you, I know this came up several years ago about adopting our own system, and we're going to put out a survey, and this committee was born out of a very tragic, hopefully one-time incident in town. So the response may be a little bit different, but can you talk to us a little bit about the mindset of residents then and why it may not have been adopted prior?
It really wasn't a thing that people were, the average citizen wasn't thinking about it or talking about it. We would talk about it at budget time every year and consider it, but it was one of those things that always kind of fell off because there just wasn't I don't even know that we realized how important it could be, or imagined some of the things that could happen. But I think probably Alex and Stu and some others did, but and it just seemed like one of those things that would be a nice to have, but wasn't a have to have thing. So
it's kind of always low-hanging fruit that could just get cut off at budget time.
Yeah, just could never justify it.
Okay.
I don't think citizens were knocking down the door saying, "Hey, we heard about this and we really want you to have it."
Right.
And it's like any other insurance policy, you hope you'll never have a fire in your house, and I don't need any insurance. And then the one time, your house catches on fire, you go, "Gee, I wish I had that insurance." The annual fees for these, be it Everbridge or any of the competitors, it's like insurance. You might not use it for an entire year. You go, "Gee, I just spent $6,000 for nothing." And so to go to the Board of Finance and go, "Hey, we need $6,000 for this thing that we might use, depending on situations," was a hard thing to sell to, primarily the Board of Finance and politically. I think with the incident that, happened in town that may have changed things somewhat, that at least for a while would be a little more receptive to the idea.
Thank you. And I know when I, directly after that incident, when I spoke to our neighboring towns, Tallinn seemed to use it a little bit more administratively for things. And Mansfield couldn't remember, at least the mayor, and she's relatively new as the mayor, but couldn't think of a time when they had last used it. Or maybe I spoke to their town manager, thought of a time where they last used their code red. So I think those two towns may be using it in very different ways. So one of the things we worried about was if you don't use it at all and you're just waiting for something like we had an incident similar to that to use, will somebody know how to use it when it's time to push the button?
Mhm.
And that was ultimately what discussions with the resident troopers around the Troop C area communicated to me, is that not a one of them can remember a time when, prior to COVID, when those systems had been used, with the exception of some significant weather events. And, part of it was who's got the password to the system at the time. So, I think the creativity with which you expand the use locally might make the cost of an internal town purchase more palatable. But for those, under the world in which I operate, those life safety events like the one in Wellington
Mhm.
are fortunately few and far between.
Okay. I did like the Code Red had the ability for us to really, and I think Everbridge does too, to build out those groups of
Yep.
things. So if you don't want to hear about transfer station closings, that's not necessarily a group that we include you in. And so there can, hopefully, if we were to go with a system, if we were to recommend and we go with that, we might have less burnout on people because they didn't sign up for those things. And then they'll go to the transfer station, see that it's closed and wish they had been notified and maybe opt in. And we could say, hey, there's a way for you to be notified if those are the things that you want to know about. Could this eventually, would something like this fit the needs of, our schools in some capacity? In which case, if it did and they stopped using the system they use, and I don't know that it would, they pull right from their data, and there's something to be said for that. There could be some sharing of the cost, which would make it a lot less for both town and school, and maybe even out the cost across, across both town and school.
The school is almost maybe not self-subscribed type of system, but at least you have a known audience of parents, right? That you're signing up for it.
Right.
And I still get messages, and my kids have been out of the school system for a long time. But
We'll have to opt you out.
okay, I manage a point of contact system at Pratt, right? Because I manage all of our quality alerts and things like that, which is why I was interested in this topic. And when it's not a self-subscribed type of discussion and you're trying to go out and capture a population that doesn't even necessarily know that this tool exists, right? It can be very difficult to keep points of contact up to date. It becomes almost so it's a very big job, right? So so we might want to give some consideration to, even if the tool that we purchase or if we subscribe to Everbridge has that capability. Pratt uses Everbridge too for emergency notifications. And I have to sign up for it if I want to get those notifications. There'd have to be, I think, some type of outreach, right, to get the right folks. And then as folks move, attrition really, it's a repetitive outreach. Unless there's something where these tools have some interconnectivity with telephone records and address changes and things, right? So
I got the impression, and I don't know how much Doug touched on it when he met with us, but when I went with the first select woman in Stafford and we went out to TN to meet with them, he and Tyler Millick spoke to us about how it's marketing. There's, every time you have a large event, you're marketing this product and you're continuously, and maybe there's an annual outreach to folks, and whether that's a mailer to remind, people. If we had, say, a welcome packet to, people who just move into town through the town clerk's office, is that something you include and send to them? But every time you do something, you're marketing to them because you have to constantly catch
Day, making sure
those people who left and those people who come back into town, or those people who've, might have changed their mind and now want to sign up. So, but that is a big undertaking as well.
Yeah, it somehow would have to translate, I think, into the roles and responsibilities of whatever person in town gets some responsibility for the system, right? And then on top of it, to try to alleviate some of the concerns about what if we use it infrequently and we don't know who has the password or whatever. You have to set up some instructions for it that people know that where they exist. I mean, I assume the town has other types of like policies and procedures and things, right? And that it would probably live in there somewhere. So at least someone say, I don't know what to do, but I know we have a procedure on it. And maybe that critical information is in there. But also that trigger to go out and refresh that point of contact list as well.
And I think it was at our last meeting where we talked about the more users that use it, the better chance you have at people remembering how to use that system, right? So if we were to engage in a system that both the schools and the town used, we may not use it for 2 years, but the schools sure are going to use it on a regular basis. They use that all the time. So there, is potential to have a fallback of someone to say, hey, I haven't used this. Can, I sit with you to do it and have a refresher kind of opportunity. If I recall, is that about the conversation we had, right? That, Phil has multiple users who are familiar with the system. We might just have that one person. And if it's a while between uses, it may take some time before they have to utilize it. And if we're at a time where someone's not sitting at their desk to pull out that procedure manual, it's, catching a resource that could walk them through it if need be. But again,
Did we get any references from Everbridge or Code Red?
They didn't give us any specifically, and I don't believe we asked them. Right. So Doug used it in Tolland, and I know Mansfield does, but those are the ones we could reach out to. But this group didn't ask either Doug or Tiffany for. And I don't know who, is there another rep, specifically with Everbridge, Stuart, that we would talk to? I know you got the quote from them directly.
Yeah, and that guy's out of Florida, I think. But he's whoever was assigned to communicate with us. I want to point out that email that I sent out to most of you today about the COVID notifications and such, which originated from the state. If you go to page 2, it talks about Kevin McManus is the point of contact for Everbridge in Connecticut, which I believe he works at the messaging center. But it tells you how invested the state of Connecticut is into Everbridge. That's their standard. That they're equipped and ready. And similar thing, let's say Doug's away on vacation, you can call the state of Connecticut in essence, who's the point of contact, and go, hey, help us craft a message. And that's what the whole second page is about. They'll help you craft messages at the time you're trying to send them out and advise you on, hey, that's too much to send out in one shot, or do you have your web page up to say here's a link you can go to for further information. And the other thing I would note, that things change, and they change quickly. A month ago they were saying the town should put out notifications for testing centers and, hey, the COVID's getting worse, that sort of thing. Well, now for almost every town in the state is red, and that message has been sent out through a zillion different media outlets of, hey, go get tested. So are you beating a dead horse at that point today? They'll say, hey, go get tested. Well, no kidding. That's all they've talked about for the last month. So what was good a month ago in terms of policy and done at the suggestion of the state, now it says, hey, don't do that because people aren't subscribing. Well, we're only going to do it if something's, really bad. I mean, that's why we don't do Everbridge for snowstorms. I mean, this is New England. You're old enough to drive, you know what a snowstorm is.
It's like the first one we all forget.
In theory, anyway.
They all forgot on Saturday how to drive.
Yeah. Look, we're talking about storms. I'd be curious, Phil, if we could get references from towns that are like Willington, right? Smaller sort of towns. It wouldn't really behoove us, I don't think, in my opinion, and correct me if anybody feels differently, to get a reference from a Vernon or a West Hartford who's going to use the system very different. They have very different resources and very different services than we have here. So their level of using it is probably more frequent, and it would make sense for them to have their own product. It's looking at a smaller community like ours and what that looks like.
And it's not so much just a reference on the company you're looking at. It's also more valuable to find out how are they using it.
Yes.
And
That's my point. Right. That's my point, Stu, is that, I'd like to, there are places, I mean, supposedly Willimantic has this. So I'd like to know how they're using it. Are they using it to put out rec notices, or are they, only using it for emergencies? How are they using it?
We use it at Pratt, I'm pretty sure, but it's just for emergencies. We have like 7,000 people on campus, at least before COVID, right? But it's just for like plant shutdowns, emergency evacuations, and that kind of thing. Now, obviously, we wouldn't have things like school system issues or road closures and that kind of thing on that campus, but that's what we use it for. And we also identified specific points of contact to act kind of as point people for the system, so that folks that maybe didn't get the notice or something like that can also help further communicate it. We do that as well.
Phil, I'll reach out to Willimantic and then Mansfield and Tallinn, see if they can share with us their specific policies. Because that is the key, right? I think either of these systems will do what we want. It's how are they utilized by communities? That's really what's going to make the difference. I think we all see the need for something like this, but our perceived need has to match the cost to taxpayers.
Yep.
I certainly could imagine it before May and in Christina's tenure, using it for some of those wonderful week-long storm events we had and being able to reach our residents in that way. And if we had our own system to update them about things, certainly we discovered how difficult it was to communicate with our community.
Yeah, hand-painted signs.
That may or may not have been spelled right. Hey, and they worked and they brought us together, but if we had had another tool, I think that's what made some of us older folks here become pretty proficient with social media, because we really had to.
Oh, yeah.
It became a way of communicating, but if we had had other means to do it, but again, do you use it once every 3 or 4 years, and what other ways, and how do you justify this annual cost that just sits there? Like Stuart says, is it an insurance policy? Because we know we have if there's a life safety incident, we have that method to use, and that's going to go out through the state system. There's no question that that's available to us and under what circumstances and how we look at it. But if there are other things that are important on a lower level, how best to communicate. And one of the things that Liza and I have discussed at multiple Board of Selectmen meetings is how to reach all of our residents in the best manner with different things. And this is just one more tool in that bucket. If we could make this work and our residents see a need for it.
I guess my point about asking for references, and I mean, just a quick Google search, there are both towns in Connecticut that have code red, and I'd just like to know why they picked it and how they're using it.
I didn't. I'm sorry,
Because if we can hear from
you broke up on so I don't know if
I'm
anyone.
frozen, sorry.
That's okay.
How many people are using Code Red? How many towns?
I think we're losing. Phil.
I killed my camera. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I killed my camera. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes.
My internet connection is unstable. Sorry. There's a lot of places in Connecticut that have it, have Code Red, and I'd like to know how they're using it and why they picked Code Red over. Have they just had it since forever? But there's a lot of places that have it just in the quick Google search, and how are they using it?
That was
Now you're gonna make me Google that.
was Code Red, and I'm sorry if I've got the difference wrong. Code Red lets you target cell phones in the area, or was that Everbridge?
They both-
Or did they both?
They
It was
both-
Everbridge.
They both would.
I believe Code Red would as well. So if you had that app and you were in the area, it would allow you to do that too. And the iPause was available on Code
Oh,
Red.
if you have the app downloaded.
Correct. So if I live in Tennessee and I have that available to me and I'm traveling through Connecticut, it would go off. So when I traveled through Massachusetts in October, about almost every town we went through on the Mass Pike got the alert on my phone. They had a standard as you came into their community COVID message, which was interesting to see. But signing up for that and having that on my phone as I went through there, it kind of captured everybody that goes. And that may have been through that iPause system. I'm not sure.
Did Everbridge do that without the app, or they both require some type of app?
I think they both might use some geofencing.
Okay. I thought one of them said that they went through the towers without you necessarily, almost like a silver alert type thing, but maybe I misheard that. Because I think it would be good to consider some platforms that, like, especially if it's for like storm communication. I don't know how many folks around here have like cable telephone, for example, but if you get their landlines in the system and we're dealing with a significant power outage, they're not going to have landlines anymore if they have cable telephone, for example, right? So having something that could either maintain multiple points of contact or email-based contact, or just broadcast that goes out to the cell phone would be cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see just on a simple search, Phil, like the town of Fairfield at one point used Code Red and is now moved over to Everbridge. Those residents must have loved having to sign up again for a new system. We're losing everybody.
Yeah, for whatever reason, my internet's terrible right now.
I think we'll have more information once we get those survey results back from folks. And Christina's got some unstable internet too. They'll always find that turning the camera off helps. And that will help us see if residents really are in favor of something. And then, if that's our recommendation, the next step is developing some protocols, no matter which system we go with. And we're talking.
I got a question for Lieutenant Palmer. I Googled reverse 911 and came up with a Wikipedia page, and it gave some examples. And one was the shooting in Sandy Hook. and some reverse 911 messages went out for that. What sort of messages was tried to be sent out, after that event or during?
I can't speak to that specifically. I was there in the aftermath, but I will say this. I believe that the alerts that went out were their standard protocol active shooter alerts for the school, because the influx of people looking to find their children was significant shortly thereafter. Word of mouth got around, but Newtown has its own police department. So whatever messages they had crafted previously for an incident like an active shooter situation in one of their schools was probably what they flipped the switch on in that moment.
Okay. I think Alex and I have some contacts in Newtown. Maybe we'll follow up with them and.
Yeah, and here's the thing, even the state police and its use of Everbridge, what I found out after in the midst and in the aftermath of the incident in Wellington was the process for that, although I was familiar with it, was more cumbersome than I would hope it would be. The routing of the message and the chain of command aspects of it, it would have been very helpful to be able to go to somebody like Doug at TN and say, and he and I have known each other for a long time. We get along outstanding. Is like, hey, Doug, I need this out ASAP. That's not how it worked. So part of what we had to do was kind of reconfigure based on levels of crisis what the process will be. So in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook incident, having read the after action report in detail, I don't recall any significant feedback relative to the messaging from reverse 911 after the incident. And I'm assuming it started with Newtown, and I don't know if it was picked up by the state afterwards.
Mhm.
But remember, that was a time when Lieutenant Paul Vance was on giving press conferences every hour or two. So
Has the local barracks or any of the other state police agencies made changes to that kind of bureaucracy that you're describing in response to our incident in Wellington?
yes.
Do you think that's something that will be shared with the public in a broader sense?
I don't know.
Okay.
I would say that I'm confident that in a similar set of circumstances, the messages that I passed on to you would be very quickly made available to the on-scene commanders for vetting. And if they matched up with the need, the approval process would be quicker and the dissemination of the info would be faster.
Okay. That's, that's promising to hear that, I think and I hope our community understands that there were multiple things at play there, and multiple decision makers that were not necessarily you or myself. So if nothing else, if it can, make the Connecticut State Police take a different look at those processes and how sometimes we need to change, and certainly in these changing instant gratification world too, right? We have multiple different resources available to us to alert folks, and so if we can look at it in a different way without hindering the police process at the same time, which I think is key. Public information is important, but what we don't want to do is at the risk of the work that the police are doing.
Well, I'll say this, that there was a specific discussion about the growth and expansion of technology relative to people's everyday communication just from 2011 to last year. And the degree to which those cell phones with such greater power relative to communications in terms of social media and other apps and what have you, whatever it may be, we are literally trying to notify our chain of command minutes after something happens to try to beat the social media info so they at least have an idea of what's happening, and then filling out the details as we develop them. So that was part of the discussion, which led to the understanding that we have to streamline our processes to a degree.
All right, any further discussion on this? All right, do we want to set the next meeting, or do we want to wait until the survey comes out and then we can schedule a meeting?
Can we set a meeting based on when we anticipate the survey to go out, and then give it a time frame, right? So if we get a time frame to come back, and then right after that, if we plan to get together. So if we can work out what that timeline looks like. I don't see that happening before the new year.
I don't either.
If and Sarah, tell me if I'm wrong, is a week enough time to get the survey prepared?
We should certainly be able to draft it. Yeah, and I don't know if this team, after I meet with Michael, if this team wants to review the output, or if we decide and then send it out. How do we want to work that piece of it? So with that preamble language and the actual wording of the questions, is that something that we want to review as a group or via email prior to distributing?
I would think we'd want to review it before.
Do you want to review it in a meeting, Alex, or?
Yeah, I think a meeting would probably be best. That way we can have some discussion about it if need be.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think of.
Calendar at the same time, so I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, I'll, if he's available, I'll get with Mike during the week and we can get the draft together and then look at if like SurveyMonkey is the right tool and how the questions would be formatted, and then show some results for this team maybe in advance and on email. And then we can decide if then what the timing of having a live discussion on it would be. You can let me know.
Is the week of Christmas for folks, is that not desirable? I'm thinking this would be the only thing we talk about so that we could then get that out there. But then again, the conversation is that the time frame, the best time frame to put it out, or do we wait till after the new year? Again, the longer we take to put the survey out, the longer it takes to come back. And then we're really into budget season. And I see Phil making the face.
And budget season starts in January proposals with February approvals. Is that what I heard earlier?
Yes.
Is that correct, or
Yes,
roughly correct anyway?
Yeah. And everything
I
in March. But if we put a placeholder in there, again, not knowing what this committee is going to come forth with, but we have some cost estimates, we could at least, leave it the dollars in the budget and then determine whether or not we think a recommendation is going to come forth. But it's the longer, more we get into January, the harder it is to find a date for most of us on here to meet, as there are multiple other meetings.
Yeah.
Do we want to shoot for the 21st?
Monday the 21st? I have a Board of Selectmen meeting.
All right.
You're talking December, correct?
Yeah.
How about the 22nd?
22nd should be fine.
That sound good for
Yeah, I
everyone?
mean, I can support that, and I'm hoping that because most of the questions are already proposed, that this is not a long putt to get out a draft, a finalized draft to get the feedback on. And maybe if we do it in advance on some email, then if you have immediate feedback, please just go ahead and reply to that, and then we can come to that 21st meeting to finalize it, and then maybe put it out. I wouldn't put it out during Christmas exactly, right? But maybe in that week after. I don't know.
I'm kind of hoping no one's traveling for the holiday. So people will be around to do a survey.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on shutdown for that week, and then I don't know what other people are doing.
All right.
Okay.
Anything else?
Is 6:30 still a good time?
30? Yeah.
Oh.
Mhm.
6:30 on the 22nd. Survey.
All right. If there's nothing else, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Is there a second?
All in favor?
Second.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Phil, can you stay on for a second?
Can you vote, Phil?
I think he's gone.
Can you vote in the chat?
No, I needed to talk to him after the meeting, but
Oh, you might have to give him a call.
all right, motion approved, meeting adjourned 7:31.